Good Erev Shabbos. I hope everyone is getting ready for the holy day of Purim. Today is the 8th day of Adar. The 8th day of Adar is the day after the Yortzeit and the birthday of Moshe Rabbeinu. It's considered a day which is a fast day and a minor holiday for tzaddikim. Of course, those of us who are not tzaddikim, myself included, can also enjoy this day, the memory of Moses. The wondrous thing about the memory of Moses is that the Torah portion where it usually falls out is Parshas Tetzaveh, and in Parshas Tetzaveh, it's the only portion in the Torah, starting from the book of the Exodus till the end of Deuteronomy, where the name of Moshe is not mentioned at least once. Even where there are other heroes and other villains, such as Parshas Bulge and Parshas Pinchas, Moshe is still mentioned. But in this week's Parsha, which deals with commanding Israel to bring the special oil for the sake of lighting the menorah, and all of the various components of the vestments for the Kohen Gadol, for the high priest and for the regular priest, and the altar, the golden altar for the incense. Throughout this entire Parsha, where Moshe Rabbeinu is commanded by God to do these things, Moshe is not mentioned. The question is why? Why is it not mentioned? Is Moshe Rabbeinu's name not mentioned in this Parsha, especially at the beginning of the Parsha, where God says, Ve'ata titzav, and you command. It doesn't say God says to Moshe, command the Bnei Yisrael, but rather, Ve'ata, and you should command. Without a name, without any kind of formal introduction. So let me tell you a story which will illustrate the point I want to make. 10 years ago, I heard a special eulogy from a son who felt honored by the persona of his father. A lot of us honor our fathers, honor our parents' memories, but this son, Larry Gormazano, honored his father in a way that was most beautiful, fitting, and unusual. His father was Jacob Gormazano, not a household name. Turkish name, Jews coming out of Turkey, Sephardic Jews. Not dark Jews, they're actually very light, but Jews that came from Spain. A lot of people with the name of Gormazano that comes from Turkey who are Sephardic Jews with that name. Oh, by the way, if you remember Neil Sedaka from the 50s and 60s is really apparently Jewish, at least the family is Jewish, comes from the same family as the Gormazanos. It's a different part of the family called Sedaka, which means tzedakah, charity. I didn't know that growing up. Neil Sedaka, Jewish boy, good singer. But here the Gormazano family are not known. Jacob Gormazano wasn't known. It's hard to even find any of his career in the army when you go online. Jacob Gormazano fought in the Battle of the Bulge. He signed up in 1942 and in 1944 was fighting for his country, fighting for his people, fighting against the Nazis. And he was caught near Western Europe, near the Ardennes forest, in what was known later to be the Battle of the Bulge, where Hitler tried to push out the Western troops with a series of attacks, forceful attacks, trying to reach the port of Antwerp, to be able to get a port on the Atlantic, and to defeat the invasion, to blunt the invasion of Germany, to extend the war, possibly develop nuclear weapons. He also had jet engines. Had he had the jet engines put on the planes en masse would have defeated anything that we could have put up in the air at the time, and he might have actually won the war. But of course we know that didn't happen. The bravery, the might, the bravery, the enthusiasm, the courage of the Allies, as well as the hand of God, prevented Hitler from breaking out and getting a foothold back again on the Atlantic seaboard. And the rest, they say, is history. A few months later, the 1,000-year Reich was up in smoke and Hitler was dead. Jacob Gormazano didn't live through the entire Battle of the Bulge. He lost a leg above his knee, somewhere up his thigh bone. He was taken to England. He was given a prosthetic leg and spent the rest of the war outside of the battlefield. His entire group died in World War II in that battle. He was the only survivor of that particular company. And he wondered, why did God leave him alive from the battlefield? No leg, just a nondescript, unknown Jew, saved from death because he was injured beforehand, before the critical battle that killed his company. He had this question for almost 40 years, 30 years, from 1944 to 1973. In 1973, the armies of Egypt and Syria attacked simultaneously on Shabbos, on Yom Kippur, known as the Yom Kippur War. It was an incredibly costly war. Israel lost more soldiers in that war than any other of its fights with the Arabs, and almost lost all of its citizens in the process. The Egyptians had advanced technology called the surface-to-air missiles, known as the SAM missiles, heat-seeking missiles, that were able to knock down Israeli jets. Israel lost almost a quarter of its air force the first few days of battle. Many hundreds of tanks were also lost. And until Israel was able to regain its footings, Israel threw everything it could to save itself. And then Israel basically had no more bullets, nothing left in its arsenal to throw at these two mighty armies coming to attack them. Golda Meir called a very influential man to speak to President Nixon. His name was Max Mordecai Fisher, having the name Mordecai just as the hero of our next holiday. And Max Fisher called up Nixon, had lunch with him, told him that Israel was basically defenseless. The only thing they had left were nuclear weapons. And it was his choice. Rearm or have Israel use whatever it has to destroy the invading armies. And Nixon ordered the rearming of Israel. But just because the president orders something doesn't mean that others will follow his orders. There is a group called AITAC, was a group, civilian group, whose job was to bring tank divisions, tank provisions, and all the munitions associated with it, and other tactical support to the soldiers in the United States Army, or wherever else they were going to be sent. This is a group that sends armaments all over the world. And this group was ordered to send tanks and supplies, resupplies, bullets, mortar shells, all kinds of shells, all kinds of vehicles, to be loaded onto these huge transport planes and delivered to Israel. And nothing was being done. There was a colonel. I don't know his name, but this colonel countermanded the order of the president and ordered nothing to be moved. Sure, he used some kind of excuse, but nothing was moving. And Israel needed the supplies yesterday. Every hour that Israel didn't have the supplies meant danger for the entire Jewish community, the 3 million plus souls that lived in the Holy Land. Jacob Gormazano went above this colonel and went to the commanding officer, the general in charge, and basically said, the commander-in-chief has ordered movement of these tanks and supplies, and the colonel in charge of the movement has countermanded that order. What are you going to do about it, General? The general probably realized that he could continue the countermanding of the order of the president, but he risked, of course, court-martial, and he ordered that the resupplying of Israel should happen post-haste as soon as possible, despite the efforts of an anti-Semitic colonel that was paralyzing this resupply of Israel. Those tanks reached Israel. Those supplies reached Israel, saved Israel's life. Partially because of the power and influence of the Jewish community as it was personified by the great Max Fisher, and also because of an anonymous little Jew who lost a leg, the Battle of the Bulge, survived. And he survived in order to save his country, his people. But nobody knows his name. Now you do. But until now, he has remained anonymous. The reason why Moshe is not mentioned here, but Moshe is anonymous, is because God is speaking to all of us. Everyone. We all see things and do things for the sake, not just only of our survival, for the sake of our communities, for the sake of our brethren, for the sake of our society. But the only one who gets credit are the presidents and other lesser luminaries. And those who are the soldiers, who's lost their limbs, and within their hearts burns a desire, not for their personal glory, but for the greater good, to do something for their community, to do something for their people. And they do, and they sacrifice. But nobody hears about them, nobody knows about them. This week's Parsha, Parshas Zohar, that's the Parsha of all of us who are anonymous. We're known. Everybody is known to their families, to their communities, but their impact is not known. But now you know, as they say, the rest of the story. Jacob Gormazano, the anonymous Jew who saved Israel. This is his Parsha. This is our Parsha.